Hey there guys, it's Metro, and today we are going to be talking about a system I've proposed as a logical alternative to the current leveling system in World of Warcraft. We'll be starting by laying out the flaws with the current leveling system and talk about how it's gotten this way, then discuss how Mythic Plus concepts has worked in other content, and conclude by discussing the ideal changes I would like to see in patch 8.0 or onward, with all of this in mind. So without much further ado, let's get right into it. At 2 points in this game's history, the leveling content was considered a sizable portion of the game's content. With Classic launch, obviously everybody needed to level at least one time to be able to play the endgame, but many people embarked on an adventure they didn't even know there was an end to. They leveled because they enjoyed the game, not because they wanted to rush to max level. If you asked the typical first-time MMO player picking up Classic WoW to pay $60 to skip to 60, I would wager almost no one would have considered that. With the launch of the Burning Crusade, we saw the beginning of the end for leveling, introducing many nerfs to difficulty, length, and adding and changing quests to remove the social requirements of previous ones. Things went further down this path in Wrath of the Lich King with the addition of heirlooms and again another nerf to experience needed across the board midway through the expansion. Then Cataclysm took up the task of redoing almost all of the classic zones to the point that leveling felt new and exciting again for many players. Even now, myself with 2+ years played in World of Warcraft, I have still seen almost none of the cata changes and occasionally find excitement in the potential of doing so, but then I realized just how abysmal the leveling systems actually are. You see, leveling has become truly depreciated content to the point that even entirely naked, it offers no difficulty whatsoever, and happens so quickly that you can't even complete the entire zone without over-leveling them and snowballing the problem into further zones. In the past, this was dealt with by making each zone give very little experience from quests alone, requiring multiple zones per level bracket, and encouraging grinding heavily. In the future, I would propose this problem can be fixed entirely by adding the Mythic Plus technology to the game, and here's why. Mythic Plus dungeons were introduced in World of Warcraft Legion, but in truth, the idea was born in Mists of Pandaria. At one point, dungeon content was so important that raiders were forced to do them just to be able to raid, via attunements in TBC and Classic, or even things like the alchemy table being in Scholomance. With Wrath, we saw dramatically decreased reasons to do 5-mans, but all that turned around in Mists of Pandaria. With the realization of the Mythic Plus system comes some of the greatest victories WoW has had in recent memories. The objective silence of those who would say dungeons are too easy and there is nothing to do in the game are among them. The system is the perfect problem solver because it gives optional difficulty curves that the player has to do progression through, and for the most part gives rewards commensurate. Those who just want to put in no effort and queue up for a dungeon can still do heroic difficulty, but those who want serious progression to the point of national competition like we see in the Mythic Dungeon Invitational now have that and much more. The true strengths of the system aren't just scalable difficulty though. Without the affix system, the dungeons would not be hard enough to matter. Each week, Mythic Plus dungeons rotate to a new set of 3 affixes that can combine into a very challenging scenario that make you approach the entire dungeon differently than past weeks. This is the type of replayability dungeons sorely needed, and one thing challenge mode did not deliver on. Now with all this in mind, I see a clear picture on how to make leveling fun and challenging again, but still quick and mindless for those who don't wish to challenge themselves. Step 1. Add new quests and change minor but impactful things about how each zone plays out. Not as big of a change as Cataclysm, but conceivable changes likely are coming with the expansion regardless, assuming the focus is on Azeroth proper again, as we assume. This gets people back interested in leveling like Cataclysm did, regardless of what else changes. Step 2. Make every zone scale in level like we saw in the Legion zones. Myself and some others, especially Cop, have discussed this heavily, and one flaw immediately comes to mind. As it stands right now, if you can go to the Jade Forest at level 5, it would make no sense whatsoever to the story. So instead, the best way to handle this would be to make every zone scale up, but not down. For example, you can do the Barrens at level 60, but not Hellfire Peninsula at level 40. As an added point, if you did, this dungeons would become invalidated, so we would need to see some time-walking capabilities for all dungeons as well. The tech for all of this is already in the game, so I would expect to see this at some point regardless of what happens in 8.0. Step 3 is where things take a big leap from the prior systems. Implement an optional difficulty to leveling that resembles the Mythic Plus system. Make it so you can turn it on or off at class trainers, or perhaps some other specific NPC that is not out in the zones to make sure people aren't abusing its potential, or perhaps even make some separate character creation option like a new server for it. Comparing directly to dungeons, the system would work like this. A +2 means the mobs are 2 increments higher. I proposed it would be enough simply to make them 2 levels higher than the player, but I'm not sure how that interacts with things like hit chance. Regardless, the goal is more health and damage, just like in 5-man, so however it's implemented, I'd be satisfied. After so many increments, implement new mechanics to the mobs, like in 5-mans. You have to heavily consider what type of mechanics though. Some like skittish would make no sense, but I primarily would like to see mechanics that increase the difficulty of pulling many mobs in succession. Things like sanguine, bolstering, or even explosive would be best, but ideally they would make whole new mechanics for this. One of my biggest problems with leveling at the moment is mobs have abilities, but they do absolutely nothing. Step 4 is finding proper incentives to do this. We'd be likely forcing cosmetic options here, but some have proposed entirely new realms just for this sort of thing, sort of like hardcore in Diablo. Either way, I will be satisfied as long as there is proportionate incentives for it. To summarize, we then have a system where most zones have new quests or storylines. Every zone scales upward, so you never have to leave a zone early, and you can make leveling as hard or as easy as you like. With all these things in mind, it leaves you in a situation where you can potentially skip the whole expansion, as I would expect no changes to come for the Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King, and they would fall further and further behind in terms of quality. This leaves us with fresh quality content on Azeroth that can be infinitely difficult. With these changes, casuals and serious players alike will be happy, and those who live in nostalgia can finally have their populated, active Azeroth continent zones back. As always, thanks for watching. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this, or ways it could become improved as well. So please leave a comment. If you're watching this after 8.0 is announced, and this did not happen, I apologize if you've been misled, but I'm just trying to have a discussion about what the possible future might hold, not will. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.